Welcome back. To enhance our discussion of the Julio Claudian emperors, that is Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero in that order, I have provided for you here an inserted video on the family tree of the Julio Claudians. There's no particular reason for you to memorize this, but it's quite interesting to see how tangled this family tree is. And it may be worth your time to get these relationships straight so that you can understand how these particular emperors came into power and some of the difficulties that arose because of the entanglement of the relationships. You should realize that these particular relationships probably contributed to some of the difficulties mentally that many of these emperors had. And when you consider especially the figure of Ovid, who got exiled by Augustus, and the two satiric writers and novelistic writers, Seneca and Petronius, the two who will eventually end up committing suicide under the orders of Nero. If you understand some of the background going on as described here, you may get a better sense of exactly why those three authors in particular all came to grief under first Augustus and then later under Nero. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the general outline of the family tree. I've left out some details that don't pertain specifically to the emperors, but you can actually do quite a bit of research to see the full story of the family. And if you read the novel I, Claudius, or if you by Robert Graves, or if you watch the BBC series I, Claudius, you can get further insight into how these characters were related to each other and how those relations didn't always work out to the benefit of everybody involved. Okay, let's get started. So, first of all, of course, you have Augustus up here. Now, Augustus was originally named Octavian, as we've talked about, and Octavian was married previously to a woman named Scribonia. Octavian, as his self before becoming emperor, only had one daughter from Scribonia, and this is her right here. This is Julia. It's important to realize, therefore, that Augustus, once he was emperor, did not have any specific heirs. In fact, Augustus did not have any way whatsoever to guarantee the successorship for the principate to any specific person listed here on the board. Eventually, it all got engineered, so we're told, by his wife Livia, and it's a curious point that Augustus and Livia themselves did not have any children. This is big for determining the eventual fate of the Julio Claudians. So Augustus has Julia with Scribonia. Livia had previously married Tiberius Claudius Nero. I just called him Claudius here for short. This is not the Emperor Claudius, that's him down here. So they have two children, Drusus and Tiberius. These two, of course, are brothers. Drusus is married later to Antonia, and their children include these three kids, Germanicus, Livilla, and there he is, Claudius. Now, it gets more tangled than that. Julia was actually eventually married to Tiberius, but the really important relationship to note here is that Julia was earlier married to the main general serving under Augustus, and that was Marcus Agrippa. Augustus had very high feelings for Agrippa, especially because Agrippa was very successful in many of the campaigns serving under Augustus, most notably in Spain. So Agrippa and Julia were married, and they had several kids, including 3 sons, all of whom could potentially have been successors for Augustus, because fortunately for the Roman world, Augustus lived to quite an old age in his 70s, and therefore all of these kids did in fact grow up old enough that any of them could have served as emperor after Augustus. But all did not work out well here, because Gaius and Julia both died mysterious deaths, and Postumus was eventually disgraced in Roman society and ended up being exiled and actually later murdered out in exile. So none of this worked out well at all. Agrippa himself was also a possible candidate for succeeding Augustus as emperor, but he himself died of an illness in 12 BC. So none of this worked out over here at all. So eventually Augustus simply ran out of heirs, and finally whether this was or was not at the instrumentation of Livia, we can't be sure. This is the innuendo that we get from the Roman biographer Suetonius, the author of the 12 Caesars. But Livia could potentially have helped pave the way for Tiberius eventually to become the successor for Augustus. So finally Augustus passed away in AD 14, and Tiberius, now Augustus's adopted son, becomes the next emperor. Now, subsequent to Tiberius, there was difficulties because there was another grandson of Tiberius named Gemellus, but Caligula was older than him. So after Tiberius' death, Caligula becomes the next emperor. There appears to have been also trouble here regarding Tiberius, who was in fact in Rome a relatively unpopular emperor, and also was self-exiled to the island of Capri due to the instrumentation of Sejanus, Tiberius' Praetorian Guard captain, whom we talked about in another video. So Tiberius did not get along well with the Roman people, and eventually after his death, which might very, very well have been welcomed by the people, the much more popular and much more charismatic Caligula took over. You'll notice that Caligula is a step downward from Tiberius in the generation. He is in fact the son of Tiberius's nephew Germanicus and his wife Agrippina. You'll notice that both of these, therefore, really come essentially from the same family, although they come from two different directions. One is coming from the Claudian line of the Julio Claudian family, and the other is coming from the Julian line. But they actually are cousins. So you can see here some of the twisting that's going on in this relationship. This kind of problem of inbreeding in high-ranking aristocratic relationships is some of the same problem that happens with many of the European monarchies. Some of the reasons why we have some of the kings who are quite insane, and the queens as well, and princesses, occurs because maybe physiologically some of these guys really were insane because of the inbreeding effect of all these marriages, which were required to stay within the royal family, and there may not have been enough fresh breeding blood to be able to ensure that the people being born would be in good physical shape and mental shape. Okay, so Caligula is therefore the great nephew of Tiberius, and eventually succeeds Tiberius as emperor. He does not last very long, as we well know, because of his madness. And when he is assassinated, the Praetorian Guard goes through the palace trying to eliminate the whole family, and finally discovers Claudius, who was actually Republican in his leaning, hiding out in a closet. So they get Claudius. Now Claudius ends up staying on as emperor, despite his objections to initially being appointed to that position, sort of elevated to it literally in a rather bad way. Now Claudius had 4 marriages. One of his marriages to Messalina produced a single son, Britannicus, but as we well know, Britannicus never became emperor. The one who eventually won out for the principate was Nero. Now Nero was the son of Agrippina II. This is Agrippina the Younger, to distinguish her from Agrippina the Elder, back over here, the wife of Germanicus. Agrippina the Younger was previously married to Ahenobarbus, and it's their progeny Nero who is going to become the next emperor after Claudius. Claudius actually did adopt Nero in preference to his own son because Nero was older. It was the same problem that came up with Caligula and Gemellus when Tiberius was emperor. But now, Agrippina managed eventually to arrange for the death of Claudius. It is suspected with a poisoned mushroom when Claudius was in his 13th year of the principate in AD 54, and Agrippina saw to it that Nero became emperor. So you can see how murderous and sometimes really quite vile and ultimately self-destructive this whole line is. But now I have not yet pointed out the craziest aspect of this entire line. I will show you. If you observe very carefully, as we talked about, We have here Agrippina the elder, married to Germanicus. She, of course, had her brothers who were all could potentially have been future emperors, but of course were not. So Agrippina, married to Germanicus, did eventually see her son Caligula become emperor. It's too bad that Caligula turned out to be relatively unworthy of that position. But now here's the other tangle. There is one more child here from Agrippa and Julia. You have Agrippina, you have Germanicus, and then Caligula has a sister. That sister is over here, Agrippina the younger. So it turns out that Claudius actually marries the daughter of his sister-in-law, with whom he's also a cousin through the Julian line, while he's descended from the Claudian line. So that really shows in morbid detail how really incestuous this whole relationship was. So it should not be surprising that Tiberius was a pretty gloomy type, that Caligula, maybe from an illness, went totally mad. Claudius just couldn't stand this whole family, and Nero finally, who was obviously smothered quite badly by his mother Agrippina, was able to conduct himself pretty well as emperor as long as he had his tutors. But once he got rid of his mother, got rid of his wife, got rid of his mistress, and eventually got rid of the tutors, it's not surprising that Nero, who wasn't exactly happy with the position of emperor, really, I think all he wanted to do was sing and dance like the Greeks, eventually just caves in, especially after the fire in AD 64, and becomes totally mad himself. And so that's the story of the entire Julio Claudian line, and as you can see, it's not a pretty business. So hopefully that will make clear why Ovid is in a position to write pretty satirically in Metamorphoses, why Seneca can do so without Okologetosis against Claudius, why Petronius can just simply make Roman society look downright rakish in Satyricon. So keep that in mind as you follow the stories of Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next video.